Some people chase power like it is oxygen. Others accidentally inherit empires, thrones, armies, and religious authority, then immediately start looking for the nearest garden, bedroom, dinner party, fishing spot, or emotionally supportive cabbage. Today, we are meeting history's least ambitious rulers. People who had absolute power and somehow treated it like an annoying group project. 1. Antoninus Pius. In a lineup of Roman emperors packed with assassinations, paranoia, military glory, and deluxe imperial chaos, Antoninus Pius looks almost suspiciously normal. He ruled for 23 years, became one of the so-called 5 good emperors, and his greatest political talent was apparently refusing to make history explode. He never personally led an army into battle. He never even left Italy during his reign. Imagine running a giant empire stretching across continents and treating it like a cozy family office you manage from home in slippers. Other emperors chased conquest, statues, and dramatic legacy points. Antoninus chased stability, routine, and probably a decent dinner. The Pax Romana thrived under him largely because he did not wake up every morning asking, "Whom shall we invade today?" Even his death stayed loyal to the brand. No dagger, no poison, no battlefield speech. He reportedly ate too much Alpine cheese, went to bed, and never woke up. Rome got an emperor who literally retired from life after overcommitting to snacks. 2. Theodore I. There is something deeply ironic about Ivan the Terrible, a man famous for rage, terror, and reportedly killing his own son, leaving Russia to Fyodor, a ruler with the energy of a candle in a quiet chapel. Fyodor was probably the least threatening Tsar Russia ever had. Politics did not interest him. Torture did not interest him. Expansion did not interest him. What interested him was prayer, church services, and bells. Lots and lots of bells. He spent so much time wandering through churches and ringing them that people called him Fyodor the Bell Ringer, which sounds less like a monarch and more like a village-side character. While boyars plotted, factions sharpened knives, and foreign powers watched for weakness, Fyodor was happiest pulling a rope in a bell tower. His brother-in-law effectively ran the country while the Tsar drifted through a holy fog. Then Fyodor died without a surviving heir, and Russia crashed into a succession crisis. One man avoided ambition so completely that even the dynasty forgot to continue. 3. Edward VIII. Edward VIII may be the cleanest example in royal history of a man looking at duty, empire, ceremony, and global responsibility, then choosing dinner parties instead. He became king in 1936, but the crown came with one annoying detail: rules. Edward wanted to marry Wallis Simpson, an American socialite who had already been divorced, and the British government was not exactly thrilled. A more determined monarch might have negotiated, delayed, compromised, or pretended to enjoy constitutional paperwork. Edward simply quit. He gave up the throne of the British Empire, at the time still the largest empire on Earth, so he could marry the woman he wanted and live the rest of his life as an extremely well-dressed professional guest. He traded state papers, royal duties, and imperial headaches for France, tailoring, gossip, and social circles full of rich people with nothing urgent to do. As Duke of Windsor, he spent decades looking polished and unemployed. For him, love won, but leisure definitely helped with the victory. 4. Wenceslaus IV. Wenceslaus IV of Bohemia was not just lazy by royal standards. He was so useless at imperial administration that he managed to get removed from being Holy Roman Emperor, which is an impressive level of professional underachievement. He missed duties, avoided serious meetings, and once failed to show up for his own imperial coronation because, apparently, hunting, drinking, or hanging around local taverns felt more emotionally rewarding than ruling Europe. He had a talent for making powerful people feel ignored. He even ghosted the Pope, which is bold when your job depends heavily on medieval religious politics. Eventually, the German princes met to depose him for being completely ineffective. And in perfect Wenceslaus style, he did not even attend the meeting where he was being fired. He preferred commoners, bathhouse girls, and casual fun to bishops, dukes, and imperial paperwork. His own brother once had him imprisoned to stop the chaos, but Wenceslaus seemed to treat jail like an inconvenient spa retreat. History gave him power. He responded with pub energy. 5. Cincinnatus. Lucius Quinctius. Cincinnatus is the political legend every power-hungry ruler secretly hates. In 458 before Christ, Rome was in serious danger, and the Senate needed someone to save the state fast. They found Cincinnatus not in a palace, not surrounded by courtiers, not posing heroically, but out on his small farm, literally plowing a field. He was covered in dirt when messengers arrived and handed him emergency absolute power. As dictator of Rome, he could command the army, override normal politics, and basically run the state like a one-man crisis machine. Most people would grab that kind of authority and start redecorating the capital in their own face. Cincinnatus did the opposite. He raised an army, defeated the enemy, saved Rome in about 15 days, then immediately resigned. No extended victory tour. No, just one more month of emergency powers. He gave it all back, went home, and returned to farming. The man treated supreme authority like an annoying errand between rows of crops. 6. Diocletian. Roman emperors were not exactly famous for peaceful exits. Usually the job ended with poison, stabbing, mutiny, battlefield disaster, or some creative combination of all four. Diocletian looked at that tradition and decided, very sensibly, that he preferred vegetables. After 20 years of dragging the empire out of the crisis of the 3rd century, reorganizing government, stabilizing power, and doing the kind of administrative work that makes normal people age in dog years, he voluntarily retired. That was nearly unthinkable. He left the throne and moved to a huge palace on the Adriatic coast in modern Croatia, where he focused on gardening. When the empire started wobbling without him, former colleagues begged him to return. Diocletian basically pointed at his cabbages and said that if they could see what he had grown with his own hands, they would never ask him to exchange peace for the endless greed of politics. Ultimate power called. Diocletian let it go to voicemail because the cabbage harvest was doing great. 7. Rudolph II. Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire had the job description of a statesman and the instincts of a fantasy wizard who had accidentally inherited a government. He moved the imperial court to Prague and turned it into a laboratory, museum, occult clubhouse, and aristocratic fever dream. Europe was sliding toward religious conflict, but Rudolph was not especially interested in managing Catholics, Protestants, diplomacy, or armies. He preferred alchemists, astronomers, astrologers, magicians, strange machines, rare animals, and anything that looked like it might unlock the secrets of the universe if you stared at it long enough. His castle became a cabinet of curiosities so intense it practically needed warning signs. He kept exotic animals, including a lion and tiger, and commissioned famously bizarre portraits where his face was built out of fruit and vegetables. While his brother Matthias was moving against him politically and militarily, Rudolph was probably examining a mysterious crystal or checking if someone had finally invented gold. He lost real power, but won the historical award for coolest imperial weird room. 8. Charles II. After the grim Puritan years under Oliver Cromwell, when theater, Christmas, and basic happiness were treated like national security threats, England was emotionally ready for a monarch who understood the value of fun. Charles II arrived like a walking apology for joylessness. They called him the Merry Monarch, and honestly, the man leaned into the role. He liked parties, mistresses, witty conversation, science, theater, and dogs. Especially dogs. His King Charles spaniels were allowed to wander through state meetings as if the government had added a furry advisory committee. Diplomats could be discussing treaties while royal pets sniffed furniture, interrupted people, or turned serious politics into a dog park with crowns. Charles was not the type to grind through policy papers with monk-like discipline. He ruled with charm, appetite, and a talent for making monarchy feel entertaining again. Even on his deathbed, he reportedly apologized for taking so long to die. That was Charles in one sentence: polite, unserious, and somehow still better company than most rulers. 9. Al-Amin, the Abbasid Caliph. Al-Amin raised procrastination into something approaching performance art. During the siege of Baghdad, his brother's forces were attacking the city. Catapults were pounding the defenses, and the dynasty was collapsing in real time. Generals were panicking. Soldiers were dying. The entire political order was having a nervous breakdown. And Al-Amin? He was by the Tigris River with a fishing rod. Not metaphorically, actually fishing. When a terrified messenger rushed in with urgent news that the enemy was breaking through, Al-Amin did not spring up, call for armor, or deliver a heroic speech. He told the man to be quiet because he might scare away Kuta, his favorite fish. Imagine your capital is falling, your enemies are closing in, and your main concern is whether a carp feels emotionally safe enough to bite. That is not leadership. That is a man treating civil war like background noise during a relaxing afternoon by the water. 10. Sancho II. Sancho II of Portugal achieved something almost elegant in its failure. He got removed by the Pope not for being a terrifying tyrant, but for being too useless to keep. His nickname was Rex Inutilis, meaning the useless king, and medieval people did not hand out that kind of branding casually. Sancho neglected the administration of Portugal so badly that his favorites and local power players ran wild while the kingdom became increasingly chaotic. What was Sancho doing instead? History is not completely clear, which somehow makes it funnier. Whatever it was definitely not governing. The situation deteriorated until the Archbishop complained to Rome and Pope Innocent IV essentially gave Portugal permission to move on from this human administrative error. Sancho did not stage a glorious last stand or fight desperately for his crown. He went into exile in Toledo and continued living quietly until he died. Even his downfall had low energy. He lost a kingdom like someone misplacing a cloak. 11. Ferdinand VI. Ferdinand VI of Spain built an entire foreign policy around the powerful idea of not getting involved. While Britain and France were busy turning Europe into a giant argument with cannons, Ferdinand treated international politics like a loud party next door and kept the windows shut. He struggled with melancholy, disliked stress, and had very little appetite for war, expansion, or theatrical kingly ambition. His favorite political tool was neutrality, and his favorite emotional support system was music. Specifically, the legendary castrato singer Farinelli. For around 20 years, Farinelli reportedly sang the same small set of songs to the king every night to calm him. That was the royal routine. Europe could burn, ministers could argue, alliances could shift, but Ferdinand wanted his evening concert and peace of mind. Spain stayed out of major wars partly because its king preferred quiet rooms, familiar melodies, and not being dragged into everyone else's geopolitical nonsense. It was basically anxiety management with a crown. 12. José Mujica. José Mujica, of Uruguay, is what happens when a president has almost no ego and apparently missed the memo that leaders are supposed to crave luxury. Most heads of state enjoy palaces, motorcades, special treatment, and suits that look like they cost more than a village roof. Mujica stayed on his wife's modest flower farm, instead of moving into the presidential residence. His security setup famously included a three-legged dog named Manuela, which is less fortress of power, and more neighbor who fixes his own fence. He donated most of his salary to charity and drove an old 1987 Volkswagen Beetle that looked like it had survived several emotional decades. He did not need golden rooms, private jets, or a throne vibe. When people called him the poorest president, he pushed back, saying the truly poor are those who need a lot to live. He governed a country while looking like he might also sell tomatoes at a roadside stand. Somehow that made him seem more powerful, not less. 13. Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge, better known as Silent Cal, turned low-effort leadership into something close to a philosophy. He slept around 11 hours a night, took long afternoon naps, and seemed convinced that many problems improved when the president refrained from making extra noise near them. Small talk was not his battlefield, it was his enemy. The classic story has a woman at a dinner telling him she had made a bet she could get more than 2 words out of him. Coolidge looked at her and replied, "You lose." Then he apparently continued eating, because why waste syllables when the point had already been executed perfectly? He presided over the booming, roaring 20s with a style that felt less like commanding the nation and more like quietly supervising it from a comfortable chair. While other presidents chased speeches, programs, crusades, and dramatic gestures, Coolidge demonstrated the radical power of naps, silence, and not turning every Tuesday into a national emergency. 14. Ludwig II of Bavaria. Ludwig II of Bavaria, the fairy tale king, treated actual governing like an irritating side quest, interrupting his main mission. Living inside an expensive dream. While Prussia was unifying Germany and the balance of Europe was shifting violently, Ludwig checked out of normal politics and checked into fantasy architecture. He hated ceremonies, disliked public duties, and eventually flipped his schedule so he slept during the day and wandered his palaces at night like a royal ghost with interior design problems. He poured mountains of money into castles, especially Neuschwanstein, building a medieval fantasy world with a royal budget and zero interest in practical accounting. He loved theatrical costumes, private performances, moonlit sleigh rides, and elaborate scenes that made reality look badly furnished. When ministers worried about debt and state business, Ludwig preferred art, Wagner, and imaginary grandeur. He was not simply ruling poorly. He was using the monarchy as a stage set for his own private legend, while Bavaria paid for the scenery. 15. Queen Christina. Queen Christina of Sweden was born into the legacy of Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North. But she had absolutely no desire to spend her life freezing in Sweden and managing wars like a hereditary office job. She was brilliant, deeply educated, curious, and painfully bored by the stiff atmosphere of the Swedish court. Instead of pretending to enjoy royal duty until death, she shocked Europe by abdicating at 28. She gave up the throne, converted to Catholicism, and moved to Rome, where the weather was better, the conversations were sharper, and the Pope was apparently more interesting company than Swedish nobles. Christina wanted philosophers, art, books, debate, scandal, and freedom. She dressed unconventionally, cursed with confidence, and behaved in ways that made polite society choke on its own lace collars. In practical terms, she walked away from a powerful kingdom because she preferred intellectual life and independence. Sweden got a new ruler. Christina got a better social circle and fewer northern winters. 16. Frederick III. Frederick III of the Holy Roman Empire had a strategy so passive it almost looked like meditation with a crown on. Enemies invaded, rivals threatened, borders shifted, and Frederick responded with the emotional urgency of a man watching paint dry in a monastery. He did not rush into dramatic campaigns or heroic counterattacks. He waited. Then he waited more. His basic political theory seemed to be that if you sit still long enough, everyone else either dies, runs out of money, makes a bad marriage, or gets distracted by a different problem. The ridiculous part is that it often worked. The fierce Hungarian king Matthias Corvinus pushed him out of Vienna, and Frederick's master plan was essentially to outlive him. Matthias eventually died, and Frederick moved back into the situation like a patient landlord. He expanded Habsburg influence not through dazzling military genius, but through endurance, dynastic patience, and the strategic metabolism of a garden statue. Ambition shouted. Frederick blinked slowly and survived it. 17. Warren G. Harding. Warren G. Harding did not enter the White House with the energy of a reformer. He entered with the energy of a man who knew, deep down, that someone had made a clerical mistake. He reportedly told friends he was not fit for the office, and honestly, his presidency tried very hard to prove him right. During Prohibition, when ordinary Americans were being told not to drink, Harding's White House had the atmosphere of a private club with government stationery. He played poker with his friends, the infamous Ohio Gang, smoked cigars, drank whiskey, and generally treated the presidency like a stressful interruption between social evenings. Meanwhile, some of his associates were busy abusing public office, leading to scandals like Teapot Dome. Harding was not necessarily plotting the corruption himself. That almost makes it worse. He was too trusting, too relaxed, and too interested in his golf score to control the people around him. The Oval Office became a lounge, and the lounge had terrible supervision. 18. Pope Celestine V. Pietro da Moroni was an elderly hermit living on a mountain when the Catholic Church looked at him and said, "Congratulations, you are now Pope." He was around 80, loved solitude, and had spent years avoiding exactly the kind of political circus he was suddenly expected to manage. As Celestine V, he entered the papal world and immediately discovered that Vatican bureaucracy was not just unpleasant, it was spiritually exhausting. He disliked the ceremony, the power games, the formal clothing, and the constant pressure. He even had a small wooden cell built inside the papal apartments so he could retreat into it and pretend, just a little, that he was still back in his cave. After only 5 miserable months, he issued the most personally useful decree of his career. A pope could resign. Then he used it immediately. He took off the papal symbols and tried to return to a quiet life. History remembers him as the man who got the biggest promotion in Christianity and promptly filed a resignation letter. 19. Pedro II. Pedro II of Brazil may be one of the few rulers in history who reacted to losing an empire like someone finally receiving permission to leave a meeting. He ruled Brazil for 58 years, was intelligent, cultured, and widely respected, but he never seemed intoxicated by power. He loved books, science, learning, and often said he would have preferred to be a teacher. The crown was less a dream than a very heavy administrative hat. When the military coup of 1889 ended the monarchy, a normal ruler might have called loyalists, rallied troops, or staged one last scene of imperial drama. Pedro basically accepted it with exhausted dignity and prepared for Europe. He did not cling to the throne. He did not try to drown Brazil in civil war just to keep his title. He packed. The revolutionaries expected resistance and got the emotional energy of a tired professor told that class had been cancelled. He lost a monarchy and somehow made abdication look like vacation planning. 20. Sultan Ibrahim. Sultan Ibrahim of the Ottoman Empire, often called Ibrahim the Mad, had priorities that were less imperial and more aggressively sensory. The empire needed careful rule, military judgment, financial restraint, and political discipline. Ibrahim wanted softness, specifically furs. He developed an obsession with luxurious pelts and reportedly wanted palace rooms covered in sable, because apparently normal walls were not cozy enough for a man with absolute power. He even pressured the system to provide more furs, which is a very Ottoman way of turning a personal comfort issue into a tax problem. His court also became famous for indulgence, eccentric favorites, and strange whims that had very little to do with responsible government. Stories about him searching for unusually large women and rewarding favorites with absurd titles show a ruler far more interested in pleasure and fantasy than administration. While the empire needed a steady hand, Ibrahim treated Topkapi Palace like a private cushion-lined dream world. Power did not corrupt his ambition. It distracted him with soft textures. 21. Prince Regent. George. While Napoleon was redrawing Europe with cannons and ambition, Britain's Prince Regent George was fighting a different war entirely. A lifelong campaign against boredom, bad taste, and insufficiently extravagant dining. He cared about architecture, fashion, food, decoration, and pleasure with a passion usually reserved for defending borders. He spent enormous sums on the Brighton Pavilion, a wildly theatrical palace inspired by Indian and Chinese design, because apparently plain royal houses were too emotionally beige. The country was under strain, but George kept spending, eating, dressing, and posing. Satirists loved him, often drawing him as a swollen symbol of excess. He even staged banquets with bizarre decorative features, including a table display with water and live fish, because nothing says leadership like making dinner look like an aquarium. Later, his imagination became so generous that he convinced himself he had led a cavalry charge at Waterloo, despite being nowhere near it. He did not govern history. He decorated himself into it. 22. Claudius. Claudius is the patron saint of introverts accidentally promoted during a workplace massacre. When Emperor Caligula was assassinated and the palace descended into chaos, Claudius did not stride forward demanding authority. He hid behind a curtain, shaking and hoping history would look somewhere else. The Praetorian Guard found him, dragged him out, and instead of killing him, declared him emperor. That is not a career path. That is being discovered like lost luggage and handed the Roman world. Claudius did not dream of absolute power. He loved scholarship, history, libraries, and obscure subjects like the Etruscan language. He would probably have been happier writing dense books that only 6 people read. As emperor, he relied heavily on freedmen advisors, distrusted the Senate, and stumbled into achievements anyway. The conquest of Britain happened under him, though generals did most of the work. Claudius wanted to study in a manuscript. Rome gave him an empire and a permanent anxiety problem. 23. Amenhotep III. Amenhotep III ruled Egypt at a time when the kingdom was rich, powerful, and comfortable enough that the pharaoh did not need to spend his life charging around in a chariot proving anything. Many rulers wanted to be remembered as warriors. Amenhotep seemed perfectly happy being remembered as the man with absurd amounts of gold and taste for magnificent construction. He maintained peace through diplomacy, marriage alliances, and the strategic use of wealth, which is a polite way of saying he had enough gold to make other kings behave. Without constant wars draining his attention, he poured energy into monuments, luxury, art, religious display, and royal image building. He built on a colossal scale, including the statues later known as the Colossi of Memnon, and created palace spaces so grand they feel like ancient luxury branding. He even had a huge artificial lake made for Queen Tai. His reign was less blood and conquest, and more gold, festivals, statues, and soft power. Egypt peaked, and Amenhotep enjoyed the view. 24. Emperor Honorius. When the Western Roman Empire was crumbling in the year 410, Emperor Honorius was not heroically defending Rome from a balcony. He was safely in Ravenna, far from the disaster, with priorities that were apparently very poultry-focused. According to a famous story, a messenger rushed in and announced that Rome had perished. Honorius panicked, but not because the ancient capital had been sacked by the Visigoths. He thought the messenger meant his favorite pet chicken, which he had named Roma. When the confused official clarified that no, Your Majesty, the actual city of Rome had fallen, Honorius reportedly relaxed because the bird was fine. Even if the story is too perfect to be fully trusted, it captures the reputation beautifully. An emperor so detached that imperial collapse sounded less alarming than chicken trouble. Imagine being handed the end of an era and responding with relief because breakfast's emotional support animal survived. Rome burned. Honorius checked on feathers. 25. Liu Shan. Liu Shan became so famous for uselessness that his childhood name, Adu, turned into a Chinese expression for someone with no potential. That is a rough legacy. During the brutal Three Kingdoms period, he inherited Shu, but he did not inherit the steel nerve of his father, Liu Bei. When enemy forces approached, Liu Shan surrendered instead of dragging the kingdom into a desperate last stand. But his most legendary moment came after he was taken to the rival court. At a banquet, his captors played music from Shu, expecting him to feel homesick or ashamed. His attendants cried. Liu Shan enjoyed himself. When asked whether he missed his old kingdom, he said he was having such a good time that he did not miss Shu at all. Even the enemy leaders were stunned. Usually conquered kings at least pretend to mourn. Liu Shan chose comfort, food, music, and survival over patriotic anguish. History wanted tragedy. He brought Buffett energy. 26. Emperor Wanli. Everyone has ignored work emails. Emperor Wanli of the Ming Dynasty turned that mood into a 30-year constitutional disaster. Historians call it the Wanli neglect, and it began partly because officials blocked his preferred choice of heir. Wanli's response was not a dramatic purge or fiery speech. He simply stopped doing large parts of the job. Morning audiences, ignored, reports, unread, vacant government posts, left empty. The bureaucracy begged for decisions while the emperor stayed deep inside the Forbidden City, refusing to appear, refusing to sign, and refusing to act like the empire's central authority was anything more than an optional hobby. Ministries began to hollow out because appointments required imperial approval, and Wanli would not provide it. Later examinations of his remains suggested serious health problems and possible drug use, which may explain some of the lethargy. Still, the image remains incredible. A ruler so committed to sulking that he ghosted an entire empire for decades after losing an argument with his officials. 27. Romanos Argyros. Romanos III. Argyros of Byzantium had the confidence of a great emperor and the instincts of a luxury bathhouse investor. He liked to imagine himself as a philosopher, reformer, and military hero, but reality was far less flattering. When he decided to lead a campaign into Syria, he treated war less like a deadly operation and more like a prestige vacation with excessive luggage. The army carried piles of baggage and fine comforts because nothing screams battlefield readiness like overpacking for glory. Predictably, when the situation became dangerous, Romanos panicked and fled, leaving the campaign in humiliation. Back in Constantinople, his interest in serious rule faded while his enthusiasm for grand-building projects and baths remained alive and well. In the end, even his favorite environment turned against him. He was found dying in a bath, likely murdered by people close to him. The man spent years drifting from ambition into indulgence, then exited history in the most on-brand location possible. 28. Kamehameha III. Kamehameha III was the longest-reigning monarch in Hawaiian history, and his rule combined real state-building with a truly impressive refusal to become a stiff ceremonial statue. He helped guide Hawaii through dangerous pressure from missionaries, foreign powers, and modern diplomacy. He approved Hawaii's first constitution and legal reforms, so this was not a man doing nothing. But personally, he had the soul of someone who would rather be near the ocean than trapped in official protocol. He loved surfing, music, drinking, dancing, and the social life of old Hawaii. At times, he escaped the pressure of advisors and missionaries to enjoy secluded gatherings where the mood was much closer to celebration than cabinet meeting. He also supported hula after missionaries tried to suppress it, effectively telling the imported fun police that Hawaiian culture was not taking orders from their frowns. Kamehameha III balanced modernization with pleasure, tradition, and waves. He was a statesman, yes, but the ocean clearly had seniority. 29. Good King Rene. Rene of Anjou had one of those medieval resumes that sounds powerful until you look closer. King of Naples, King of Jerusalem, Duke of Lorraine, Count of Provence. Very impressive on parchment, less impressive in practical control. A more ambitious man might have spent his life launching wars, raising armies, and screaming about lost titles. Rene chose a different route. He largely accepted that some crowns were better as decorative paperwork and settled into a life of art, poetry, gardening, tournaments, and southern French sunshine. He became known as Good King Rene, not because he terrified enemies, but because people actually liked him. His tournaments were often more theatrical spectacle than brutal military rehearsal, which tells you everything about his vibe. He preferred beauty, culture, and a pleasant court to endless conflict over claims nobody could fully enforce. In a world full of men willing to burn provinces for inheritance rights, Rene basically chose painting supplies, pageantry, and a glass of wine in Provence. 30. Richard Cromwell. Richard Cromwell inherited one of the most stressful jobs in Europe, running the military regime built by his father, Oliver Cromwell. Unfortunately for the regime, Richard had none of Oliver's iron will, battlefield reputation, or terrifying political force. He was a gentle country gentleman who liked rural life, hawking, and not being crushed under the boots of angry army officers. The soldiers did not respect him. Politicians maneuvered around him. The whole system began shaking almost immediately. After just 9 months as Lord Protector, Richard looked at the chaos and essentially chose personal survival over pretending to be a dictator. He resigned and disappeared from power. While England moved toward restoring the monarchy, Richard lived quietly, sometimes under assumed names. dodging debts and avoiding the kind of attention that got ambitious men imprisoned or executed. He died at 85, which in that political environment was practically a gold medal. His greatest achievement was knowing when to quit before history sharpened the axe. 31. Robert III. Robert III of Scotland did not simply lack ambition. He seemed painfully convinced that he was not made for kingship at all. After being injured by a horse and left physically weakened, he withdrew from active rule and let more forceful relatives dominate the kingdom. His ambitious brother Robert, Duke of Albany, effectively took control while the king faded into the background with the energy of a man apologizing for existing near a crown. Medieval kings usually obsessed over legacy, honor, burial sites, heroic songs, and making sure future generations carved them in stone with flattering cheekbones. Robert's self-image went in the opposite direction. He reportedly said he should be buried in a dunghill with an inscription calling him the worst of kings and the most miserable of men. That is not modesty. That is royal self-roasting at a tragic level. He did not crave glory, conquest, or monuments. He seemed to want history to understand one thing. He knew he was bad at the job. 32. Emperor Zhengde. Being Emperor of Ming. China meant endless ritual, formal audiences, Confucian discipline, paperwork, and ministers constantly explaining why fun was irresponsible. Zhengde had no patience for that suffocating routine. He turned imperial life into a bizarre role-playing game with unlimited funding. Court life bored him so much that he created a fake commercial district inside the palace grounds, complete with shops and taverns, then forced eunuchs and officials to dress as merchants so he could pretend to be an ordinary shopkeeper and haggle over prices. Imagine senior ministers trying to run an empire while their boss is asking whether the fake noodles are overpriced. Then he invented an alter ego named General Jushu and issued orders as if this imaginary military hero were a real person. Zhengde wanted adventure, danger, and street life, but he was stuck on the dragon throne, so he built make-believe versions of them at state expense. The bureaucracy panicked. The emperor played shopkeeper-soldier. So now the comment section has a job. Name the laziest, most useless, least ambitious historical figure we left out, and do not bring weak nominations. If your pick would still answer emails, they are too motivated for this list. Drop the name, defend the crime, and let everyone argue. And if you enjoyed watching powerful people do almost nothing, hit like and subscribe, because history has an endless supply of disasters wearing crowns.